This is Golden Years, a roadmap to navigate retirement with Mark Cordner, the podcast.
Well, here's to introducing the latest hidden fee in healthcare. The Wall Street Journal reports that some hospital systems are charging patients a, quote, facility fee for the office in which they meet their doctor. That bill alone can run into the hundreds of dollars for just one visit. So let's talk about your firm here, Mark. How transparent are you about fees? Do you charge clients just to kind of come in and talk with you?
Oh, heavens no. And I find that story just stunning. Maybe a symptom of our times, but I find it just stunning. Fees are a big deal, a really big deal, I think. And most clients, I find, aren't even aware of what they've been paying over the years. The Wall Street Journal that you cited actually did another study some years ago regarding the average 401k participants' fees. And they said that, or concluded that, the average participant in a 401k plan is paying a little over 3.5% a year on their account. And that's because of all the trading costs. So we have to recognize that some costs have to be disclosed, other costs do not. But when we factor in all the cost, it can be very expensive. And so I think this is a critical part of the discussion. And before anyone ever does business with us, I insist on having that conversation. And hopefully I'm able to beat the client to that topic. It's in the back of everyone's mind. And so it has to be addressed, of course.
Yeah.
But the more transparent we are, the better likelihood there is of a win-win relationship that lasts decades, which is really our goal. I'm not looking for 2 and 3 week kind of relationships. We're looking for 20-year relationships. And that just takes complete honesty. And so we do an analysis for people. They know precisely before we enter any kind of relationship what the cost will be. Typically, we're going to be about a third to a half less than what they've been accustomed to. But that's because of some unique things we do in the way we interact with our clients. For example, a lot of what I do is group events. We do group classes, we do group social events, and through those experiences, clients are able to learn. We're able to answer many clients' questions simultaneously because most clients have the same kind of questions. And so when we do group events, they're learning from each other as well as learning from us. And by factoring things in that manner, we're able to reduce the cost. A lot of people, they go in, this is funny, I find people come in and they'll often say, my wealth manager or financial advisor, whatever they want to call them, is, they want to talk every quarter, but I don't really know what we're talking about because it seems like we're just reviewing if we're up or down and if we have, authorization to trade or make changes. And it doesn't seem like we should be trading and making changes that much. And I don't really understand it. It's not like we're planning. We're just giving an accounting for what happened the last 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
I find that most people don't want that, frankly. What most people want is big picture discussions and non-monetary discussions. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why we do these group sessions is that people are able to learn from one another as well as from us the principles needed to have peace of mind.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, is having that, that added peace of mind. And whether it's about fees that somebody's, of course, paying you to put a plan together, or maybe it's about the hidden fees within their plan, right? I mean, there's lots of fees associated with things like your 401k, and some of those fees you don't even necessarily need to be paying. And you identify these and you go, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we can save you X amount of money because this right here is not what we need to be doing.
That's absolutely right. A lot of times, I'm not against fees per se if there's a value being provided for the fee. And so that's the question. What we often find when we analyze portfolios for people in those complimentary sessions is that they're paying for certain features or added benefits on investments that are really not needed. For example, we'll have people who have very rich pensions from various employers, and it turns out that they're paying added fees to provide pension-like features to certain investments, which they really don't need. And so why would you pay an extra 0.5% or a full percent on your portfolio over potentially decades for something that you didn't need? And so those are eye-opening discussions. That's why we always invite people in. Let's do an analysis. Let's see what you're dealing with now and see if it's appropriate or not. So we always invite folks in. We'd love to do a free, a complimentary analysis of the investment, see what people are paying now, if it's appropriate for what they're getting for their services, and if not, recommend changes that they may want to consider to reduce their cost. Because again, a 0.5 point fee or a 1 point fee added up over potentially decades is a big deal that can really cannibalize the portfolio.
Mark, you were talking about pensions just a few moments ago. Well, Americans apparently miss their pensions and the guaranteed income that they provide. A new study found that 75% agree with that statement of the disappearance of traditional pensions has made it harder for workers to achieve the American dream. So the bottom line is there a way to create a personal pension so someone still can have that American dream? What do you say to that?
Absolutely, yes. That's a key part of our service. And it's one of the common concerns that we hear most frequently when we do our adult education classes at the colleges. The truth is that there's a lot of anxiety around this idea of how do we replace a consistent stream of income that we've been accustomed to when we go into retirement, because there's so much uncertainty going into retirement. Anyway, the last thing you want uncertainty about is money. Having that income coming in every month to cover groceries. And so we can set up private pensions. There's different, what people call private pensions. There's different financial instruments we can utilize for that. Annuities have become extremely popular again for great reasons, because they're uniquely capable of creating income that a person can't outlive. I personally own 5 annuities, and I will certainly own more before I ultimately retire. But I do that because I'm very concerned about having dependable income for my wife and for my son who has disabilities, that they never have to worry about income coming in every month. We jokingly call it play checks, versus paychecks, but that money needs to hit every month, and we absolutely can do that. Annuities are wonderful tools for that. They're not the only tool, but they're the only one that can uniquely guarantee that income won't stop as long as you're breathing.
Well, if you just turn 60, then you join the camp of Jill McBride. She has as well. She is the former CEO who founded the website grownupdish.com.
I just turned 60. On Sunday nights, I sort my pills. I just turned 60. If I can't get a dinner reservation by 8 p.m., I'm not going. I just turned 60. Of course I have to put my glasses on to cook. I just turned 60. Of course, if I have even one glass of wine, I'm going to sleep like crap tonight. I just turned 60. Of course I use my Alexa to ask how old all the celebrities are. Alexa, how old is Lionel Richie?
Lionel Richie is 74 years old.
Listen, there's a lot of those statements in there that I would agree with. If I can't get a dinner reservation by 8, I'm not going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like to be there by 4:30 and beat the dinner crowd myself. So.
The early bird gets the worm is what they say.
That's right.
Oh,
sometimes
man.
cheaper prices too. So.
That's right. Exactly. Well, if you just turned 60, I'm sure you identify with a lot of what Jill just had to say there. And, a lot of it is, what should we be doing at 60? We know a lot of things change in our routines, as she kind of mentioned. I'm counting my pills. I'm not going out late. If I have a glass of wine, I'm not going to feel great. So things change in our life, and things also need to change as you start to prepare for retirement. So if somebody just turned 60, they're listening right now, Mark, what should they be doing as far as getting their income and retirement plan together?
Well, first off, give us a call. We've got some checklists we can share with you, some key retirement ages and decisions, timelines that we've got in print, black and white, so people can see the various issues they need to address. And there are a number of them, frankly. If we can get people thinking about this, preferably by their early 50s, certainly mid-50s, that gives us a lot of advantages. We all think about Medicare at age 65, Social Security sometime between 65 and 67. Those are obvious big issues. We hit age 73, we have to start taking required minimum distributions out of our traditional pre-tax savings. These kind of issues some people are aware of, but most people aren't aware of the fact that they have opportunities to take control of their retirement savings. I can think of a young couple that, I shouldn't say young, they're a year or two older than I am, I guess, but they came into us when they were 55 and were anxious about preparing. Now, they had done a tremendous job saving in their 401k. But as we talked about these timelines of the things they needed to be aware of, the truth was we weren't able to do a lot for them in terms of immediate investing, because pretty much everything they had was in their 401k at work. And they were under the impression that they could not touch that money until they left employment. Well, the truth is not that. The truth is that 3/4 of the 401k plans out there offer what's called an in-service withdrawal provision, or an in-service rollover privilege. And basically what this means is that when you reach the age of 59 and a half, you can actually take control of the old money that you've accumulated within your 401k plan. You can roll it out of that group plan into an individual retirement account, and then have a whole universe of investment options outside of work that did not exist in the work-based plan. So, for example, this couple had about 20 different mutual funds available to in their work-based plan. And like most 401ks, it did not have any kind of real principal protected options. They were very conservative. They are very conservative still. They're clients of ours now. But what they did was they actually came back to us at the very week that they turned 59 and a half. They called me a couple of years later and says, hey, we're ready. So we showed them how to roll that money out. They were able to choose more appropriate investments than what were available in their 401k. And in their case, more importantly, they were actually able to start doing conversions of those old 401k savings into tax-free Roth IRA status. And that's a critically important thing. We typically prefer having done before age 63 because there's implications to Medicare Part B premiums. And so the earlier we can get together on these things, the better. Certainly by age 55, you ought to be sitting down with a financial professional. We invite folks in, or just give us a call. We'll email you over these timelines and just let you see what priorities need to be in place before you take that big leap into the unknown, as it were, into that retirement. There just shouldn't be uncertainty going into retirement. There's lots of opportunities there. There's things like home equity conversion mortgages, commonly known as reverse mortgages, which are not right for everybody, but they're great for some people. But you got to be age 62 to qualify, which means you ought to be learning about it in your 50s. And so there's a number of things like this that people need to get a head start on. And
you know, when it comes to retirement expenses, there's one line item that Americans get wrong, and that's how much they'll spend on healthcare and medical. If you haven't thought about this, sit down. This is probably going to blow your socks off here. They told Fidelity, a recent survey, that over 20 years in retirement, they think that it'll be around $41,000. Again, this is what the folks told Fidelity. But of course, research shows that the real estimate is $315,000. This does not include long-term care, folks. This is every day, you get a cold, go to the doctor. These are things like that. So what's their reaction when you sit down with individuals, Mark, when you point out the differences here of income and planning for healthcare costs down the road?
Well, it's shocking for most people, but it's I think perhaps the most critical part of their planning, because the one certainty for most of us is that as we age, things are going to change. I mean, we've already experienced that in our 40s and 50s. We start getting into our 60s and 70s, and things start changing at a more rapid rate. We become more frail. We start experiencing illness. There may be cognitive issues that come into the picture. And so Medicare is a wonderful health insurance program for people over the age of 65, but there are costs to participating in Medicare. You've got Part B premiums, for example, which right now are about $175 per month per person. And so that's $350 per couple per month. Then you've got your copays, you've got vision and dental and hearing kind of cost. All of these things tally up. And so Fidelity does a great service, I think, to Americans by updating this study every year. And I'm so glad that you pointed out that long-term care is not part of that study, because long-term care is the custodial care. That's the hands-on care that we need as we become sick or frail, often with age, certainly with cognitive ailments. And so I think of my grandfathers, one who had money and one who did not, and how their experience going through dementia was so much different. And it's kind of perverse that money is what makes the difference in care, but it does. And so we need to start addressing these issues earlier than later. And sometimes that means that people have to think differently about their assets, including home equity, for example. We need to be able to put everything on the table and say, for example, with long-term care, are you like most Americans where you don't have a conscious plan in place? And if so, what that means by default is that you are agreeing to pay 100% of a future unknown liability. Now think about that. Get your mind around that. You're by default agreeing to pay 100% of a future unknown liability. That can be absolutely devastating for people. Certainly when the costs are between $80,000 to $100,000 a year per spouse for long-term care right now. And so I'm a big proponent of what we call building a moat around the castle. I lived in Europe for 6 years, and I remember as a child visiting castles and all, and certainly when I went back as a young adult, there was always a moat around the castle, and its purpose was to keep the invaders away from the treasury, which was in the heart of the castle keep, as they call it. Well, for many people, the healthcare providers are basically the invaders. I mean, they have good intentions, but they're coming after your money because they're providing care that we need. And so we need to have some kind of protective measures in place to protect the family wealth. And there's absolutely ways to do that without even giving up the wealth. There's ways to multi-purpose wealth so that we can put airbags or guardrails, whatever analogy we want to use, in place there, or that moat, to protect the family's wealth. One other, just before I shut up on this topic, there was an interesting comment recently made by an academic who said that Americans, in light of these studies from Fidelity, he was commenting on these things. He said Americans probably should think differently about Social Security. They should probably think of Social Security as their primary funding source for medical cost and retirement, which was interesting. So what he's saying is, we don't think of Social Security, we shouldn't be thinking of it so much as an income source, supplemental income, but rather as a means of paying for these massive costs that are going to be coming in retirement related to our health. I thought that was a profound insight, and perhaps something that many Americans should embrace as a planning strategy. It's different for everyone, of course, and so we invite you in. Let's take a look. How are you prepared for future healthcare cost? Is that even part of your plan? There was another study done that just boggles my mind. It says that only 7% of financial advisors are discussing long-term care with their clients. Well, to me, that's absolute malpractice. That's certainly a reason to fire your advisor if they haven't been talking about this, because long-term care is the greatest social health crisis of our time. And that's a big thing to say right after a pandemic. It is the time bomb that will blow up people's retirement plans. And if your advisor who you've been paying to guide you hasn't even been addressing that, well, what in the world are they addressing? It doesn't matter if they got you a 0.5% greater rate of return if all that money is going to get blown up in healthcare cost. Does that make sense? I mean, it doesn't really matter what the rate of return is if that money is going to be lost to healthcare cost. We absolutely have to address the healthcare costs.
Investment advisory services offered through Golden Years Financial LLC, a registered investment advisory firm. Insurance is offered through Golden Years Insurance Services. These firms do not provide legal or tax advice. Consult your own legal and tax advisors before taking actions that may have tax implications. Investing in securities involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Insurance contracts principal protection is based on the claim-paying ability of the respective insurer. None of the information contained on this website shall constitute an offer to sell or solicit to buy a security or insurance product. The information and opinions contained on this site or requested from this site are provided by third parties believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. They are provided for informational purposes only and are not a solicitation to buy or sell any of the products mentioned. Any media logos and or trademarks contained herein are the property of their respective owners, and no endorsement by those owners of Mark Cordner, Golden Years Financial, or Golden Years Insurance is stated or implied.